This next example is about sequences. Sequences are much easier to learn by looking at them rather than talking about them. If you look at the green numbers, that is a sequence. A sequence is a melodic idea that is repeated usually 3 times. If you look at number 1, you see how starting on F sharp, you have this sequence. Then you have the same sequence starting at number 2, except now it starts on G instead of F sharp. It's been elevated. Number 3 actually breaks the pattern because the composer could have written this. But the composer chose to write this. If you notice, number 3 breaks the pattern, and that's the general way sequences work. Sequences almost always come in 3s. The theory is that a composer wants to introduce a melodic idea with 1, increase the intensity with 2, and then break the pattern with 3. By doing so, the composer is able to create a long phrase and a more satisfying cadence. It's very important that you be able to identify sequences and play them appropriately. If you play it correctly, you have this forward motion going through the entire 4-bar phrase. Now that we understand the structure of sequences, we can start to understand how to play them. If we are to achieve a sequence that feels like one whole unit, you can't do too much for number 1. You can follow the melodic line, but you should save some for number 2. Number 2 should be an expansion on number 1. So if you start number 1 at piano, you should start number 2 at mezzo piano. Number 3 breaks the pattern completely. In this context, I find it best to pull way back and really crescendo through the next bar all the way to D. The dissonant 32nd note A sharp can serve as the peak of the phrase, as is indicated by the music. However, I find it best to go to the D, because it makes it feel like a complete 4-bar phrase. You should still emphasize the A sharp because of its dissonance, however, you should do it with length rather than volume. Here's what it sounds like. The 2 lines at the end, the red line on A sharp and the brown line on C sharp, indicate tension and release notes. However, like in the previous video, you should not stress both of them. You can only choose one of them, otherwise you have too many emphases in one phrase. To conclude this video, I'd like to talk about phrase structure. Phrases are most commonly found in multiples of 2, with the most typical being 2, 4, 8, and 16 bar phrases. In this etude, you can see this printed very clearly. It starts with a 2-bar phrase with the peak on F sharp. It's followed by another 2-bar phrase with the peak on G sharp. The sequence follows afterwards, which is a 4-bar phrase. This is very common in classical music, that is to say 2, 2, 4.